A grandmother in a small fishing town noticed the change first. She had been hanging wet clothes on a line behind her house when the afternoon light flickered, as though a cloud had crossed the sun. But when she looked up, there was no cloud. There was a shape, silver and massive, sitting quietly among the stars where no cloud could ever reach. Within hours, similar reports came from every corner of the planet. Fishermen, pilots, soldiers, and children all looked up and saw the same thing. A fleet of ships larger than any building humans had ever built, hanging silently above their world. The ships belonged to the Calyx Imperium, a power that had spent centuries moving from star to star, taking what it wanted from every world it found. To the officers aboard those ships, Earth was nothing special. It was simply the next name on a long list of conquests. Their scouts had studied the planet for months before the fleet arrived, and their reports were clear. Earth had no fleet of its own beyond a handful of research vessels. Its people fought each other more than they cooperated. Its cities were bright, and its factories were busy, but none of that mattered against warships built to break planets that had once fought back with far greater strength. Leading the fleet was Overlord Terrence Sale, a commander who had overseen the fall of 11 worlds before this one. He did not expect Earth to be difficult. He gave the order to open communications, and within an hour, every screen and every radio channel on the planet carried the same message, translated instantly into every human language. The message was short: surrender your world, hand over your weapons and your knowledge, and your people will be spared. Resist, and your cities will burn one by one until you understand your place. Governments around the world scrambled to respond, but very few of their citizens knew that behind closed doors, a plan had already been prepared. Decades earlier, after finding signs that humanity was not alone in the universe, a small group of scientists and military leaders had convinced their governments to prepare for exactly this moment. The program had no dramatic name in public records. Those who worked on it simply called it the Foundry. Its existence was known to almost no one outside a handful of underground facilities scattered across the world. General Daniel Reyes was one of the few people trusted with full knowledge of the Foundry. When the Calyx fleet arrived, he was called into an emergency meeting with the leaders of a dozen nations, all of them frightened and unsure what to do. Reyes told them plainly that Earth could not win an open battle right now, not with the ships they had today. But he also told them something else. He told them that if they could buy enough time, real time, weeks rather than days, humanity would have a chance no other conquered world had ever been given. The task of buying that time fell to Ambassador Helen Ward, a woman who had spent 20 years negotiating trade disputes and border conflicts long before anyone imagined she would one day speak for the entire human species. She was chosen to meet with the Calyx envoy, a sharp-eyed diplomat named Lyra Doss, who arrived on the surface with a small guard escort and an expression that made it clear she expected the meeting to be short. Ward played her part carefully. She spoke of the complexity of human government, of the need to consult hundreds of nations before any surrender could be agreed to, of leaders who all needed to be heard before any decision could be made. Doss grew visibly impatient, but she did not see any real threat in the delay. From everything the Calyx Imperium had observed, humanity was disorganized, frightened, and incapable of coordinated resistance. A few extra days of talking seemed like a small price to avoid unnecessary destruction of resources they intended to keep. While Ward spoke in conference rooms above ground, the real work of the Foundry moved forward far below the surface, in facilities built into old mountains and abandoned mines. Dr. Rachel Voss, the lead scientist of the program, had spent years preparing for a moment she hoped would never come. Her team had a head start that the Calyx Imperium did not know about. Decades earlier, a damaged probe from an unknown species had crashed in a remote desert, and its wreckage had quietly become the foundation of everything the Foundry had built since. It was not a working weapon. It was a set of clues, patterns, and technology far beyond anything humans had built on their own, waiting for people clever enough to understand it. Voss did not know if her team's work would be enough to save the planet. No one did. But as the Calyx fleet settled into a slow, confident orbit above Earth, treating the entire negotiation as a formality before an easy victory, she allowed herself a small, grim sense of hope. The Imperium believed it already understood humanity completely. It believed Earth was simply a trophy waiting to be collected, its people too weak and too divided to matter. What the fleet above did not know, and what its officers would not learn until it was far too late, was that the quiet, stalling, confused species below them had been preparing for this exact day for longer than most Calyx soldiers had been alive. The stage was set, and neither side yet understood how differently this conquest was about to end compared to all the others that had come before it. In the town nearest the largest Calyx warship, people had begun giving it a nickname, the way people once gave names to passing storms. They called it the Watcher, because at night its lights could be seen from the ground, unmoving, patient, and impossible to ignore. Life below it had not stopped completely. Children still went to school, though their teachers now included short lessons on what to do if the sirens sounded. Markets stayed open, though shelves emptied faster than they could be refilled. Underneath all of it sat a tension that never fully went away, a sense that the world was holding its breath. Ambassador Helen Ward continued her meetings with Envoy Lyridas, and with each session she found new ways to slow things down without appearing to refuse anything outright. She raised questions about how surrendered weapons would be counted and verified. She asked for written guarantees about the safety of cities, knowing the Calyx Imperium rarely bothered writing anything down for a species they considered beneath such courtesy. Doss answered with growing irritation, but she did not order an attack. She had been told Earth would fall easily, and nothing she had seen yet suggested otherwise. Far from those meeting rooms, deep inside the mountain facility that housed the foundry, Dr. Rachel Voss and her team worked with a focus that left little room for sleep. The wreckage of the old alien probe had given them a strange kind of head start decades earlier, but turning old fragments of broken technology into something that could stand against a modern battle fleet was far from simple. Voss had assembled engineers, physicists, and even a few stubborn amateur inventors who had spent their whole lives building strange machines in garages and basements. It was an unusual team, but the Imperium's confidence had bought them just enough time to make it work. Their first true test came sooner than anyone expected. Overlord Terrence Sale, growing impatient with the slow pace of negotiations, decided a small demonstration of force might speed things along. He ordered a strike on a military base that satellite scans showed had already been evacuated, a place chosen specifically because it was expected to be empty. His goal was simple: to frighten the humans into surrendering faster without wasting real resources on a target that mattered. What Sale did not know was that the base was not entirely empty. A small unit under the command of Sergeant Peter Lang had been ordered to remain nearby, watching from a safe distance, with strict instructions from General Daniel Reyes. When the Calyx strike came, tearing through empty buildings and cratering the runway, Lang's unit performed exactly as they had been told. They allowed themselves to be seen retreating in a chaotic, disorganized scramble, dropping equipment, shouting confused orders, looking every bit like a frightened, poorly trained force with no real chance against a real invasion. It was, in truth, a performance. Every stumble and every dropped rifle had been planned in advance. Reyes wanted the Calyx Imperium to see exactly what it expected to see: a species too disorganized and too frightened to fight back in any meaningful way. The footage of the retreat reached Overlord Sale within hours, captured by his own scanning drones. He watched it with something close to satisfaction. It confirmed everything his reports had told him about this species. They would break easily, just like the others. Sale sent word back to the wider Imperium, reporting that Earth's collapse was proceeding exactly on schedule and would likely be complete within a matter of weeks. His superiors, busy managing dozens of other conquered worlds, gave the message little more than a passing glance. Earth was, after all, just one more name on a very long list. Back in the mountain facility, the mood was different. Voss and her team had used the distraction of the fake retreat to run their first real test of new technology, a set of modified drones built using patterns borrowed from the old alien wreckage. The drones were small, cheap to build in large numbers, and carried a kind of signal jamming that no one on Earth fully understood the theory behind, only that it worked. In a controlled test far from Calyx sensors, the drones managed to disrupt communication between two decoy targets in a way that suggested something important: a weakness in Calyx systems that no conquered world before Earth had ever found or exploited. General Reyes reviewed the results with Voss late that night, both of them exhausted but unwilling to stop. He asked her plainly whether this could actually work against a real Calyx ship, not just a test target. Voss admitted she did not know for certain. No one could know until they tried it against the real thing. And trying it meant finally showing the Imperium that Earth was not as broken as it appeared. Reyes nodded slowly. The performance of weakness had bought them time, more time than anyone had truly expected. But performances could not last forever, and both of them understood that the next move would decide everything. Somewhere above them, Overlord Sail slept peacefully in his flagship, confident that Earth's fate was already sealed, unaware that the quiet, stumbling species below him had just taken its first real step toward proving him wrong. A Calyx patrol pilot named Rendale had flown escort routes above dozens of conquered worlds, and every one of them had eventually looked the same from the cockpit, quiet, defeated, and unwilling to fight. He expected nothing different from the world below him now. A small blue planet the fleet had already labeled as good as taken. His squadron's job was simple: fly a wide patrol loop, watch for any sign of organized resistance, and report back that there was none. It was, by his own admission, one of the most boring assignments in the entire Imperium. What Rendale did not know, and what none of his squadron knew, was that they were about to become the first real test of something humanity had spent years preparing in secret. Commander Nathan Cole had been given a simple but difficult task by General Daniel Reyes. Use the technology developed inside the Foundry, the same drones tested quietly during the staged retreat, and find out once and for all whether they could do real damage to a real Calyx patrol, not a decoy, not a simulation, but an actual armed squadron flying above their world. Cole did not tell his pilots this would be an easy fight. He told them the truth, that no one knew exactly what would happen once the drones made contact with a live target. Dr. Rachel Voss had explained the theory as best she could. The old alien wreckage buried decades earlier had given her team a rough map of a communication and shielding system remarkably similar to what Calyx ships used. And if that map was accurate, there was a specific pattern of interference that could overwhelm their shields from the inside rather than trying to break through them from the outside. The plan called for patience. Cole's forces waited until Rendale's patrol reached a quiet stretch of sky far from the main fleet, a routine loop that no Calyx officer would think twice about. Then, on Cole's signal, a swarm of small drones rose from a hidden launch site, moving low and fast, using terrain and old satellite blind spots to stay hidden until the last possible moment. Rendale saw the warning lights on his console only seconds before his shields failed completely. There was no explosion at first, only a strange silence as every system on his ship went dark at once: radio, weapons, navigation. All of it overwhelmed by a signal his sensors had never been designed to recognize. His squadron mates fared no better. Within minutes, the entire patrol drifted helplessly, their ships intact but completely powerless, easy targets for the human fighters that followed behind the drones to finish the job. It was the first time in longer than anyone in the Imperium could remember that a supposedly primitive world had destroyed a full Calyx patrol squadron without losing a single pilot of its own. Word of the incident reached Overlord Terran Sail within the hour, delivered by an officer who clearly did not know how to explain what the sensor logs showed. Sail reviewed the data with a mixture of confusion and irritation. He had seen unusual defeats before: ships lost to freak accidents, careless pilots, unexpected terrain. He decided this must be something similar, a fluke caused by outdated Calyx equipment rather than any real strength from the humans below. He gave orders to replace the destroyed patrol and made a note to increase caution slightly, but he did not change his overall plan. Earth's collapse, in his mind, remained only weeks away. Back in the mountain facility, the mood was very different. Voss received the full data from Cole's strike late that night, and as she studied it line by line, her exhaustion turned into something close to disbelief. The theory had worked. Not partially, not in some limited way that needed years of refinement, but completely, on the first real attempt against a live target. The old alien wreckage had given humanity something rare, a genuine blind spot in Calyx technology that no conquered world before Earth had ever discovered, simply because no other world had studied its enemy this closely before deciding to fight back. General Reyes gathered his closest advisors that night, along with Voss and Cole, and laid out the decision they now faced. They could continue the slow, careful performance of weakness a little longer, gathering more data and building more ships before revealing anything further. Or they could accept that the window for hiding was closing fast, especially with Envoy Lyridos still moving freely through human cities, and begin the real mobilization the Foundry had been built for from the very beginning. Voss argued for action sooner rather than later. Every day they waited was another day the Imperium might stumble onto the truth on its own, whether through a suspicious officer, a leaked report, or simple bad luck. Reyes agreed. The performance had done its job. It had bought humanity time to test its secret weapons safely, away from the full attention of the fleet above. That night, quiet orders went out to factories, military bases, and hidden facilities across the world. Orders that would have meant nothing to anyone outside the small circle who understood the Foundry's true purpose. Production numbers, once slow and careful, were told to increase without limit. Pilots and engineers who had spent years training in secret were finally told the truth about what they had been preparing for. High above, Overlord Sale continued his patient countdown toward an easy victory, unaware that somewhere below him, an entire planet had just quietly decided the time for hiding was over. A Calyx supply officer stationed on one of the smaller support ships noticed the problem first, though he did not yet understand what it meant. Shipments of fuel and spare parts meant for the fleet's outer patrol stations kept arriving late, or not at all. At first he assumed it was simple bad luck, a broken transport here, a delayed shuttle there. It took 3 more missing shipments before he realized every single delay traced back to the same region of space near Earth, and by then, it was already far too late to matter. What the supply officer could not see from his console was the coordinated human campaign now unfolding across the entire planet. General Daniel Reyes had spent years planning for this exact moment, and when the order finally came, it did not begin with a single dramatic battle. It began quietly, in the dark, with small teams striking supply routes, communication relays, and orbital drop points all at once, in dozens of locations spread across every continent. The Calyx Imperium had conquered worlds before by overwhelming them quickly, landing troops, crushing resistance, and moving on before any organized defense could form. Earth refused to follow that pattern. Instead of one large defense that could be broken in a single decisive battle, humanity struck in small, coordinated pieces, hitting supply lines the Imperium had assumed were completely safe this deep into what should have been a peaceful occupation. Commander Nathan Cole led the first wave of strikes against a cluster of drop pods still in orbit, using the same drone technology that had already proven itself against Rendale's patrol weeks earlier, now built in numbers no one outside the Foundry had believed possible so quickly. The drop pods, packed with ground troops meant to begin the final phase of conquest, never made it to the surface. Instead, they drifted uselessly in orbit, their systems overwhelmed before a single soldier could land. On the ground, Sergeant Peter Lang led what had once been a small, quiet unit into its first real offensive action. The disorganized retreat his soldiers had performed weeks earlier had been a lie built to deceive the Imperium, and now Lang's real skill showed clearly. His unit moved through forests and city streets that Calyx soldiers, trained for open battlefields on worlds far different from Earth, found difficult and unfamiliar. Human forces used narrow alleys, thick tree cover, and underground tunnels to strike quickly and disappear before any real counterattack could form. Calyx soldiers, used to enemies who either surrendered quickly or fought in predictable, straightforward ways, struggled to adjust. Reports flooding back to Overlord Terransale painted a confusing picture. Ambushes in places sensors had marked as safe, supply convoys destroyed by attackers who vanished before backup could arrive, entire patrol routes going dark one after another. For the first time since arriving above Earth, Sale found himself without a clear plan, forced to react to a species that seemed to grow more dangerous with every passing hour rather than weaker. Envoy Lyridos, still technically engaged in surrender negotiations with Ambassador Helen Ward, watched the shift happen from the ground with growing alarm. She had spent weeks believing, along with the rest of the Imperium, that humanity's disorganization was genuine. Now, watching coordinated strikes unfold with a precision that no truly broken species could manage, She understood the truth far sooner than her superiors did. She sent an urgent message back to Sale, warning him that Earth's intelligence reports had been catastrophically wrong from the very beginning. Ward, for her part, no longer bothered pretending. When Doss confronted her directly, demanding to know what game humanity had been playing, Ward answered simply and without apology. She said that Earth had never truly considered surrender, only survival, and that the weeks of careful, frustrating negotiation had given her people exactly what they needed: time. Dr. Rachel Voss, watching real-time reports flow into the Foundry's command center, allowed herself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction as strike after strike succeeded beyond even her most hopeful predictions. The technology her team had built from decades-old alien wreckage was no longer theory. It was reshaping the battle in real time, exploiting weaknesses the Calyx Imperium had never needed to defend before, simply because no conquered world had ever pushed back hard enough to find them. By the end of the first full day of open resistance, the picture above Earth had changed completely. Supply lines that once flowed smoothly now arrived late or not at all. Patrol squadrons that once patrolled with total confidence now moved in cautious, defensive formations, unsure where the next attack might come from. Overlord Sale, standing on his flagship bridge, stared at reports that made no sense according to everything he had been taught about conquering weaker worlds. For the first time since his fleet had arrived, Sale began to understand that Earth might not be the easy trophy his superiors had promised him. Somewhere far below, in a mountain facility few Calyx officers even knew existed, General Reyes and Dr. Voss studied the day's results with quiet determination. The tide had turned, but both of them understood that the hardest fighting and the Imperium's full response was still to come. News of a failed conquest rarely traveled far within the Calyx Imperium, buried quickly beneath reports from hundreds of other worlds still safely under control. Earth's failure was different. Within days, whispers of it reached council chambers far from the small blue planet where it had all begun, carried by officers eager to explain why an occupation promised to take weeks had instead turned into open, ongoing warfare. The Imperium had built its reputation on certainty, on the idea that resistance was pointless and surrender was only a matter of time. Earth threatened that reputation in a way few worlds ever had. Overlord Terran Sale understood exactly what was at stake when he requested reinforcements. Admitting failure was never easy within the Imperium's rigid command structure, but continuing to lose ground while pretending everything remained under control would have been far worse. His request was approved quickly, and within days, a much larger fleet began moving toward Earth, carrying not just more ships, but a clear message from the Imperium's highest command. This conquest would be finished decisively, both to secure the planet and to remind any other world watching that resistance never truly succeeded in the end. On Earth, the mood shifted the moment sensors detected the size of the approaching fleet. General Daniel Reyes had expected reinforcements eventually, but the numbers now heading toward the planet were larger than anything the Foundry's most careful planning had prepared for. Commander Nathan Cole, reviewing the same data late into the night, understood immediately that the small, hit-and-run tactics that had worked so well against patrols and supply lines would not be enough against a full battle fleet arriving with a single, focused purpose. Dr. Rachel Voss had spent every spare hour since the first successful strikes preparing for exactly this moment. She had always warned Reyes that early victories, however impressive, would only provoke a stronger response, and she had used that warning to push her team toward one final piece of technology, something bigger and more dangerous than anything tested so far. Building on the same weakness discovered in Calyx shielding systems weeks earlier, her team had developed a countermeasure specifically designed to target a flagship's central systems, the kind of vessel every Calyx fleet depended on to coordinate its forces in battle. The reinforced Calyx fleet arrived in Earth's upper atmosphere 3 days later, filling the sky with more ships than most humans had ever imagined possible. Overlord Sale commanded the assault personally from his flagship, determined to correct the failures of the previous weeks through sheer overwhelming force. He ordered a direct, coordinated strike aimed at breaking Earth's defenses quickly, before the strange, unpredictable tactics that had troubled his forces so far could be organized into any meaningful resistance. Commander Cole met the fleet with everything humanity had built in secret over decades of quiet preparation. Ships constructed using knowledge drawn from old alien wreckage combined with human industrial power, smaller and less individually powerful than Calyx warships, but built in numbers the Imperium had not expected from a world they still, even now, underestimated. The battle that followed became the largest and most desperate fight Earth had ever seen, filling the sky with wreckage and light as both sides committed everything they had. For hours, the outcome remained uncertain. Calyx firepower tore through human formations faster than new ships could replace them, while human tactics, unpredictable and constantly shifting, prevented the Imperium from ever fully closing in for a decisive blow. Sergeant Peter Lang's ground forces worked alongside orbital teams, using data gathered from the fighting above to guide precise strikes against Calyx landing attempts, buying Cole's fleet crucial time it desperately needed. The turning point came when Dr. Voss gave the signal to deploy her final countermeasure, directed specifically at Sail's flagship. Drawing on data gathered weeks earlier from the very first successful drone strike against Rendale's patrol, the countermeasure exploited the same fundamental weakness in Calyx shielding technology, but scaled up and focused with brutal precision against a single, critical target. Sail's flagship, the anchor of the entire Calyx battle formation, went dark within minutes, its shields collapsing entirely, and its weapons falling silent one system at a time. Without their flagship's coordination, the rest of the Calyx fleet began to fracture, individual ships forced to make decisions on their own, unfamiliar with fighting an enemy this adaptable without central command to guide them. Human forces pressed the advantage immediately, concentrating fire on isolated ships and further disrupting communication between what remained of the Calyx formation. Aboard his crippled flagship, Overlord Sail watched his once overwhelming advantage collapse around him, forced for the first time in his long career to consider the possibility of retreat. Every lesson from 11 previous conquests told him this should not be happening, that no world this technologically young should be capable of fighting an entire reinforced fleet to a standstill, let alone crippling its flagship in the process. Yet here, above a planet his superiors had called an easy trophy, that exact scenario was unfolding in front of him, and there was no longer any way to pretend otherwise. In the same small fishing town where a grandmother had once looked up and seen a silver shape hiding among the stars, the sky finally changed again. This time, people gathered outside their homes to watch it happen, standing in the same yard where wet clothes had once hung forgotten on a line. The great ships that had sat above them for weeks, unmoving and confident, were pulling away, retreating into the dark in ragged, uneven formations very different from the proud arrival that had first frightened the world. The order to withdraw had come from Overlord Terran Sail himself, though it cost him more than he was willing to admit even to his own officers. With his flagship crippled and the rest of his fleet scattered and disorganized, continuing the fight risked losing everything rather than simply losing the planet. It was the first time in his long career that Sail had been forced to accept defeat, and he understood, even as he gave the order, that this failure would follow him far beyond Earth's atmosphere. News of the retreat spread through Calyx-controlled space far faster than the Imperium would have liked. On worlds conquered decades earlier, worlds that had long ago accepted quiet obedience as their only option, people who had grown up believing resistance was pointless began asking quiet questions they had never dared ask before. If a small, young world like Earth could force an entire reinforced fleet to withdraw, perhaps the Imperium was not as unbeatable as it had always claimed to be. The Calyx High Command moved quickly to control the story, but whispers, once started, proved far harder to silence than any single fleet. On Earth, Ambassador Helen Ward found herself in a very different kind of negotiation than the one she had spent weeks pretending to take seriously. Envoy Lyra Doss, humbled by everything she had witnessed, no longer spoke of surrender terms or tribute. Instead, the two women worked towards something closer to an actual treaty, one that recognized Earth not as a conquered world waiting to be processed, but as an independent power the Imperium could no longer safely ignore. It was not peace built on friendship or trust, but it was real, and it was earned. General Daniel Reyes stood on a hillside overlooking one of the many battle scars left behind by the fighting, craters and burned fields that would take years to fully heal. He thought about the decades of quiet preparation that had led to this moment, the generations of scientists and soldiers who had worked on the foundry without ever knowing if their efforts would matter. Beside him, Dr. Rachel Voss said little, exhausted in a way that went far deeper than lack of sleep. But there was something steady in her expression, the quiet relief of someone who had helped save more than she had ever dared hope to save. Commander Nathan Cole returned to what remained of his fleet, smaller now than it had been before the final battle, but still intact, still flying, still a symbol of something Earth had never possessed before, a real defense capable of standing against a power that had once seemed unstoppable. Sergeant Peter Lang, back among his unit, found it strange to think that the same soldiers who had once staged a fake, humiliating retreat were now spoken of as some of the first defenders to truly fight the Calyx Imperium to a standstill. In the weeks that followed, life on Earth began the slow, uneven process of returning to something resembling normal, though nothing would ever be entirely the same again. Cities rebuilt, governments argued over how to organize humanity's new place in a much larger and more dangerous universe, and ordinary people slowly came to understand just how close their world had come to becoming just another quiet, obedient name on the Imperium's long list of conquests. Far beyond Earth's solar system, in corners of space no human had ever seen, news of the small blue planet's defiance continued to spread. Other species, some still under Calyx control and others simply watching from a cautious distance, began sending quiet messages toward Earth, some seeking alliance against a power they had long feared too much to challenge alone, others simply curious about how a world so young and so overlooked had managed to do what so many older, more advanced civilizations had never dared attempt. Overlord Terran Sale, recalled to answer for his failure before Imperium leadership, carried with him a report that would trouble commanders across known space for years to come. Earth had not won because it was stronger. It had won because it had refused to be predictable, because it had studied its enemy carefully instead of simply fearing it, and because when the moment finally came, it had been ready in a way no one, least of all the Calyx Imperium, had ever thought possible. The grandmother in the small fishing town never learned the details of drones, shields, or flagships. She only knew that the silver shapes in her sky were gone, and that her grandchildren would grow up under stars that, for the first time in weeks, felt like they truly belonged to Earth again.